and welcome again to the Distributed Republic webcast. I love that new funky intro. We just came up with it a little bit beforehand because I wanted to bring that energy into some of the conversations that we're having. And we've got a really great conversation for you today around building an accessible and inclusive metaverse. So if you're new to the webcast, you haven't come across this before, we explore the impact of decentralization, Web3, the metaverse, and AI on our social, economic, and political systems. Our mission is to ensure that communities that can benefit the most from the inception of new technologies have access to the resources, education, and expertise to thrive in a digital world. We have a specific format for this kind of webcast, so we are going to do our best to minimize jargon and keep our answers short. And the reason we want to do that is because it doesn't matter what level of technical ability or how new you are to this topic, we want you to be able to take things from our conversation today. However, sometimes when we're talking about tech stuff, it is impossible to completely remove the jargon. So what we have is a terminology guide that you can pick up at my Stan store, which is stan.store/Jamie Bykov-Brett. You can go in there. There's a terminology guide for Web3, the metaverse, and AI. If you hear something and you're like, that sounds completely out of whack for me, I've never come across it before, check out that. You might be able to find it in the terminology guide. And we'd also love to have your questions, comments, whatever channel you're on. We're on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. We can see them all in here, and we do our best to address and answer people's questions at the end of the show as well. So do feel free to say that you're here, say where you're from, and we'd love to be able to kind of hopefully answer some of your questions as we go. So into the crux of today's episode, and I'm very excited about this one because it's probably one of my favorite topics to talk about. So we are going to be talking about building an accessible and inclusive metaverse. My guest today is Elena, and Elena, I always say, you know, I can never do people justice in introducing them. So would you like to introduce yourself into this?
Yeah, so I'm Elena. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Neuro. I'm also a neuroscientist. I also have a disability, so this topic is very close to my heart and what I'm building personally and through Neuro. So I'm very, very excited to, go through all of the questions, hear everyone's thoughts, and kind of dig right into what it's like to build an accessible metaverse.
Fantastic. And just because I think it's a really fascinating project as well, give us a little bit of background into Neuro and what you do.
Yeah, so we started NeuroXR and the combination between neuroscience, psychology, and business when we were students. So I was the first year studying neuroscience. I saw a really big opportunity in introducing the power of the human mind and the very heavy data sets into commercial and business practices. We pivoted around 6 months ago to the metaverse and VR because obviously with the massive boom in technology and innovation, we saw a lot of gaps in how the users feel, and the company is not really understanding how to deal with that really new customer base and that really new platform. So right now we are designing a software that combines biological methods from brain, heart, every single thing from your body, and introducing that into heat maps to show companies exactly how their users feel, but at the same time allowing the users to be involved in the creation of the metaverse from the beginning.
Fantastic. I think it's we spoke about it before, but it's almost like the click ratio on a web page for the metaverse, for being able to look at these virtual worlds and see the impact. Such a great project. So I'm going to get into our questions for today, and let's start off with our first one, which is, what does building an inclusive and accessible metaverse mean, and why is it important?
I think it really does depend. I mean, inclusivity and accessibility from my perspective might mean something else to other people. But from my experience working with this, I think it's like a method of not only building, developing, and advertising, and also testing these virtual environments for everyone, no matter where you come from, what your ability is, what your gender is, just being able to create something that is easily used and enjoyed, no matter what your background and where you come from. And I think, it's very important because not only from a business perspective, companies are then able to all of a sudden access such a different demographic and user base all of a sudden, but at the same time it allows people from marginalized groups, from disabilities, to adopt this technology early on and to be able to use it for different uses that they couldn't physically. So I know there's that example of using VR to do your shopping if you can't leave your house, and do that shopping that way, or talk and meet with your friends. So there are a lot of different ways that people with accessibility issues that they can use the metaverse. So I think building that inclusive and accessibility is very important for millions of people. There's not just one or two people from those groups. There are millions and millions in every single country that face these issues, but they do not have that accessibility with technology.
Fantastic answer. There's so many great points there. I think participation and people being able to get involved in new ways is such an important aspect when we're looking at it, particularly from even just from one aspect of it, from a disability lens. What we're talking about is 78% of people have navigated away from a website because they're inaccessible based on a disability. That's a huge amount of customers that people are losing. I can't remember the exact number, but I think it's around about 5 trillion pounds every year. The disabled communities are either explicitly in charge of, as in it is their own money, or have influence over, which is the same amount of what's expected to require to recover from the COVID pandemic. So you can see there's a massive audience out there of people, even if it's just from a business point of view, there's a real need there to be able to be supported. But also then you go to actually the personal level and going, there's a lot of people who are not able to participate in the same way that others are. And being able to use technology as this amazing way to be an equalizer is such an important factor for making sure that everyone is able to participate in a way that's meaningful. And we need to socialize those ways of meaningful participation. The other side of that as well is, as much as technology could be an equalizer, it can also combine with pre-existing inequalities to magnify those inequalities, particularly if you don't have access to. And I think that this is where some of the work that you're doing with Neuro XR really kind of lends itself to go, well, we're going to look at the way that people are going to participate in these online worlds and be able to change the experience to make it more meaningful. I think that's a really powerful way to look at what's coming up from our virtual world, our metaverses, and our VR.
That's our aim, yeah.
I'm glad I understood the mission. That's good. I'm 100% on board. Fantastic. So, what are some of the challenges in creating an inclusive and accessible metaverse, and how can we overcome them?
I think it can categorize into two. The companies that I've seen are either large corporates or startups. So obviously from a startup point of view, the main challenge is capital. And as much as you want to implement those, inclusive, accessible, frameworks, it's really hard when you don't have the money to do so. For an early startup, you can't just hire someone with the AI expertise from the beginning because you focus on your development. But when it comes to big corporates that have, millions to, play around with, I think it's really important for them to really focus on the AI and to be able to, not only work on the development and the innovation, but also work on the user experience and the accessibility issue. But I do think that, the biggest one is capital, to be honest. It's that's, the biggest one in the metaverse as a whole. A lot of companies need, external investment to move forward and move quickly. But, that's exactly how you can overcome them. Increased funding for startups working on these projects. There's so many companies that are working on, like yourself, like us, and so many other companies that I've met that work on DEI from the beginning, and that's their focus. To be able to bring in that capital to them from the beginning is so important. And it allows this accessibility issue to be addressed from the beginning. And also introducing DEI in, from the development stage in big companies. I think that's really important. They have money to do, every single thing. they can definitely hire someone to deal with that issue as well. Also things like grants and programs, having the government side and having that, public body to support all of these projects. I think there's some really good areas that we can start. At the same time, it's hard to do it from the beginning. Even us, as much as we want to do it, there are so many things that we want to work on from DI, from a sustainability point of view. So it's just choosing one and working with it. And I think things like prototyping and development, there's something that I figured myself and I didn't really know from the beginning. Introducing demographics from your prototyping and development, I think it's vital in making sure that technology that you are developing is accessible for everyone. You don't want to go through that trial and error. You want to be able to, when you're testing your product, when you're creating it, you have that good, diverse group of people to test it with and get your feedback.
I really like that, particularly let's touch on that endpoint there, because it's actually so much more difficult to retrofit accessibility onto products when they've already existed. It's much easier to be able to build it from the beginning and be able to say, hey, we've incorporated this as part of our design process and we've made sure that it's accessible to different groups and communities. Once again, though, when we're talking about some of the financial barriers as well, and there's, I suppose, a little bit where I would have a slight different perspective as well, is the cost of people not participating is far greater than the cost of making it possible for them. If we're talking about that audience of £5 trillion there that are open to be spent, that's a massive part to be able to go, hey, if we're building for these clients to be able to make sure that someone is able to utilize our website, is able to utilize our virtual world in a way that's meaningful, then we've just attracted a whole new group of people who are quite often find it difficult to find products that are able to support them in a meaningful way. So there's a massive aspect from that consideration. And also, when we're talking about the DEI aspects with big corporates, I think unfortunately we've seen quite a lot of reductions in staff from Microsoft's, Google's, and all this kind of stuff. If you actually look at some of the teams that they're cutting, unfortunately, it's the DEI teams. It's the ones that they ramped up during the pandemic, during Black Lives Matter, and it's now the ones that they've gone, actually, we don't see as much value from being able to have in place, which I think is a crying shame. And it goes completely against what we're talking about from, how do we make sure these things are more inclusive? So, I think that when we're looking at that financial aspect, I love that, we're looking at some of the barriers that stop participation, and financial barriers is a massive aspect of not being able to enable people to be able to get involved, to build meaningful product, to design with a wide audience in mind. And I always think that people need to remember that the cost of a reasonable adjustment to fit someone with who's neurodivergent into your workplace is normally £50 to £150 to actually be able to, whether it's screen reading software or to equipment. It's actually not that much to be able to afford the technical assistance that's there. However, that means that there's a huge amount of people that aren't able to participate within the workplace. We see 68% of autistic people unemployed, 26% of dyslexic people unemployed or underemployed. And that's people that aren't able to be meaningful in your design. And that goes once again to our enablement barriers. How can we build accessible products if diverse groups that are not represented in part of the design process, where they're not listened to or consulted in that decision-making process? I think that's something that organizations have to start thinking about when they're trying to design for wider audiences.
I think just start somewhere.
Okay, go for it. Go for it.
Just start somewhere. You don't have to do everything at once. Just start somewhere, build upon it, see how it fits, and see the benefit.
Definitely. So our next question is, how can we ensure that the metaverse is accessible to people with disabilities and those from marginalized communities?
I mean, from, a disability point of view, I think just the whole development of the product is vital. Just making sure that not only the actual user experience is accessible, but, hardware is the way that it feels. Is it accessible for people that have, sensory issues? That's one thing. There are so many questions that you can ask. And that's my point. Ask people. It's you don't need to spend a lot of money to get those answers. I find people on LinkedIn that says they're working in DEI. Just ask them some questions, have a conversation with them, get feedback, and that's where you start. And that's how we did. We just approached people from different areas, different perspectives, and that's how you build a product. That's how you should build a product anyway, and get feedback from everyone around. But I think we're in an age where you can get information from a simple Google search. So it is quite overwhelming to all of a sudden be bombarded with so much information and you don't really know where to start. Just take it slow, ask people that ask family and friends that may struggle or have, minority groups, ask people on LinkedIn. And I think that's a really good starting point for a lot of companies to, make sure that whatever they're building is accessible.
Fantastic. There's some really nice points to be able to touch on from that bit. I think when we're looking at that design process, there's two aspects for me that I think are really important that tie into what you're saying, which is the first one is that if we design with the extreme in mind, we generally benefit the mean population. So if we're trying to make our product as broad as possible, as accessible as possible, the chances are that user experience improves for everyone. And people quite often forget that as they're going through, because like, well, actually, it's too difficult if we're accommodating this person, we're accommodating this person. But actually, most of the time, we can all benefit from adjustments being able to be put in place that work for everyone. I use the example I think we spoke about before of the remote control. The remote control was designed for people with accessibility issues to be able to change the television without having to get up to be able to go and do so. Now, every household has a remote control, if not multiple remote controls. And it's that whole idea that what we're trying to do is make sure that every community is incorporated within our design process, which also leads me to the second bit, for which I find really important, is designing for preference and not just ability. And I see Anne Herman in the comments, so I'm sure she would like this one because we talk a lot about people's thinking preferences, but we're talking much more wider scope here. Is when we are designing things, we quite often talk about reasonable adjustments. And the way that I always think about this is nobody wants to be reasonably adjusted. Everybody hates that process of going through it. Nobody wants to feel like there needs to be an adjustment for them. But actually, when we're designing for things for preferences as well as ability, it doesn't matter whether you do need the adjustment or not. You'll still have a preference either way to being able to go, actually, I prefer having things this way. So from a neurodiversity perspective, I think about, if I was designing a metaverse environment with autistic people in mind, I might mute some of the colors. I might make sure that it's less overwhelming, less stimulating. So we're accommodating visual, sensitivities and stuff like that. If I'm designing with the dyslexic ADHD spectrum on the mind, I might go, hey, we need to have lots of moving parts, lots of bright colors. Now, that would mean that environment might suit those people and they can perceive that environment however they want to based on their own preferences. But anyone else might also go, you know what? I've got a headache today. I'm going to turn down some of the sensitivity here. Actually, on this day, I need something to keep me awake. I need the attention. Let me kind of brighten these colors, keep going. And that means that we've got a product that is much better for the end user across the whole process. So I'm going to go into our next question, which is, and I think you are probably the most perfect person to be able to answer this question, which is, what role do emerging technologies such as virtual reality and artificial intelligence play in creating an inclusive metaverse?
So many things. It does so much good things, and that's why we enter this market. You can see the potential from the beginning, and a lot of people that don't really realize just how useful virtual reality can be. Being able to seamlessly go from one activity to the other without moving is insanely useful for people with disabilities. Being able to socialize with other people, being able to go back to some of the hobbies that you weren't able to perform before, that's just completely opens up a new world to millions of users who had to leave the house. And you needed the pandemic to see those issues, but those issues were there for years and years before. And I think the pandemic really showed just how, day-to-day disabled people go through their activities, and how many accessibility issues there are in the world just performing any sort of activity, anything. And I think virtual reality has really addressed that issue. And, it makes me so happy that a lot of these companies are working really hard to build upon that and make sure that not only just that very small virtual reality niche is addressing the accessibility issue, but technology and innovation as a whole. And at the same time, with artificial intelligence, I think it allows for technology to be developed quicker than before, and is able to provide a personalized experience as well. It can learn from however you interact with an environment or a technology, and it can, create a new environment that is best suited for you. And bringing in that artificial intelligence, I think it's so useful, like you mentioned before, to, switch environments from one case to the other and be able to learn and improve as it goes. And it also allows for companies to not have, a really big team to develop a certain type of product. They can use an AI to continuously improve and build upon what you're trying to build.
Amazing. I love that one with an AI bit as well, being dyslexic, using an AI where I go, you know what, I know what I want to be able to write. I know all of the content that I want to do. I can lay it out. I can tell an AI to just fill in the gaps. And it means that I'm able to produce articles that normally would have taken me, half a day to write, because the content would be there pretty quickly. But the checking, rechecking, going through grammar and everything like that took me such a long time to be able to do. Whereas now, utilizing free to use AIs, I can reduce that workload, and it gives me more opportunity to participate in a more meaningful way. And I think the point that I would love to be able to add onto this one as well, and if people take away just a few things from me in this webinar, is when you're looking at technology, I always look at there's 6 barriers that you're looking to be able to resolve. And using technology, you might be able to, when you're designing it, what you should be doing is going, how does our technology address at least one of these 6 concerns? So the first one is attitudinal. What barriers relate to specific attitudes or thought processes or prejudices held by people with certain characteristics by those without? So there's lots of ways that we can address attitudinal barriers. It could be the case of thinking about it from a socialization point of view. It could be the case of use the example of glasses. We don't often consider people who have poorer eyesight as being disabled, because we've addressed a barrier that was there, which was by giving people glasses. And because they're so socialized and everyone sees glasses being as a day-to-day thing, people don't face further prejudices because they're wearing glasses. So we were able to remove one of the attitudinal barriers that are there. The technological barriers is related to access to and use of digital technology. So how can we make sure that every community has access to the technology they need to be able to do it? Really good example. I used to be a youth worker. I would quite often have young people, and I would be supporting young people from marginalized background who had only access to a mobile phone that was cracked, that they didn't have any data usage on their phone for. And a business would go, you know what, if you just send me across their CV, we'll guarantee them an interview just to be able to get them on the process. And I didn't realize how difficult it is to be on your phone designing a CV to be able to send something across. We've spoken quite a lot of the financial barriers. This relates to the impact of wealth and the access to products and services. The social challenges that are there as well. So what are the challenges to full inclusion that include like barriers to aspiration raising, lack of information, lack of advice, in order for people to make informed decisions. Enablement barriers. So what can we do to stop barriers that created for diverse groups that are not represented, listened to, or consulted to in the decision-making process? So we've spoken that a little bit more as well. You're saying, hey, we need to reach out on LinkedIn, find people who are part of these communities, bring them into your team, consult them along the way, because that's what's going to get you the best outcome from what you're doing. And finally, there's the policy barriers. So, what are the institutional barriers, policies, or practice that unfairly discriminate and prevent individuals from fully participating in any given activity? I think if you're designing a product and you can go, we have looked along our process and we've looked at these 6 factors and we can do something to address them along the way, then you're going to have a product that's going to be much more inclusive and much more accessible. That was a bit of a rant on my part, but I think it was really important just to be able to bring those up, because I want people to walk away with a framework that they can use to think about what's going forward. So we're coming near the end of our webcast. We've got 5 minutes left. So just before we go on to our last question, I can see we've got loads of comments, so I want to make sure that we've got time to be able to do that. But if you have any extra comments, questions, or thoughts you want to be able to add in, write them in now, because there's a 1 minute delay between me talking and you receiving this content. So start putting them in, and then we'll have them ready by the end of this question. So, final question. What steps can companies and developers take to build an inclusive and accessible metaverse, and what is their responsibility in this regard?
I mean, like I mentioned, before, even from our company, I have a disability and we have a diverse team. We want to address all these issues, but there are so many issues to go through. And but just starting with one, I think is very important, and just making that one step. I think that's what a lot of companies are maybe hesitant to do, especially if they come from a non-diverse group and, it's very homogenous. A lot of these companies, a lot of these people that I've talked to are a bit hesitant and think, okay, this may be not my place because I don't have those issues. But just starting somewhere, I think it's very, very important. And we can't expect everyone to do everything at once, and that's fine. I mean, even us, we had to learn from other perspectives to see other issues that we couldn't see before. And you can't expect every startup to have the best DEI framework, talk about sustainability, accessibility, everything at once, because that's not the priority. And I know how hard it is to get development for technology and move quickly to market, but starting somewhere, I think, is very important. Talking to people, listening to these, pieces of information, just making sure that you're learning. And, when you're building a company, you learn every single day. So just use it as a lesson, make a note, make a folder. Every piece of research that you find, put it somewhere, have a read, share it with your team, make sure that you learn every single day, and you'll be able to find new pieces of information every single day, and you'll learn something new, and then you can then collate it with your team and say, okay, I found this piece of information I think is really important, let's address it. So, you can't expect everyone to do everything, but make sure that people have an open mind, are ready to learn, and they accept that they can do more. I think that's, a perfect place to start. And then, you can ask people, then implement it and get feedback and then build upon it. But I think the first step is the hardest to take and the most important. No matter if your team is not diverse or you don't have any accessibility issues yourself, it doesn't really matter. Start somewhere and then see how it goes. You'll see a lot of benefit. All of a sudden, you'll see a whole new demographic that you can access. And that's when things get really exciting. And you can see that there's not only a societal benefit that you're addressing, there's that monetary aspect as well, which, it is important for a company. And then when you all of a sudden see a new demographic that you can access, then you can see, the big business benefit that you can have.
I think it's such a well-articulated answer. And the main thing that I took away from that is start with something, get yourself out there. You're once again, if you're tackling something, if you're putting an idea in place, if you're putting a plan in place, then you're always going to be benefiting more people along the way. But I don't have a huge amount to add to that because I think that was amazing. Fantastic. I'm going to go to your questions, comments, and thoughts. So we can see that we've got Sharad, thank you very much for joining us again. We've got a question here from Anne, and I think it's a really good one as well. What do you see the biggest barrier to accessibility being? Is it access to technology or both? We've only got a few bits, so quick answers on these ones.
Both, to be honest, just from how people use that technology to actually getting the access and being able to use it, I think is definitely two big issues that you can address.
Yeah, Definitely love it. We've got some thoughts around regulation here from Rainer going, EU standards will apply to AR, VR, XR, and the metaverse relating to accessibility. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can just have a look at regulation and work accordingly. I think it's a really good place to start. And also when you're looking at, depending on what country you're in at the moment, look at the regulations that are in place and the legal implementation of it. When we're looking at protected characteristics in the UK, our language that we use within our legal structure is built on the social model of disability. So it's about being preemptive. It's about making sure that we're not just doing things retrospectively. And that's what we have as a legal requirement. Slightly different within the States, but really worth noting.
Yeah, I think just
yeah,
to add very quickly to that, I think things are, we're expecting things to improve. From a government perspective, they still don't have the biggest understanding of AR or metaverse. So it's just expected to develop more and more. So just built as a company, and then the government will follow as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Just another one here from Anne. Can we quickly go through the 6 barriers again? So it's attitudinal, technological, financial, social, enablement, and policy. Those are the ones that we tend to look at, but there's obviously a bit more of a description further up. And you can always re-listen to this show and the webcast as we go through. Elena, I want to thank you so much for your time, so much for your energy and your insights. It was incredibly welcome, and I've enjoyed this discussion thoroughly.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. And for everyone, if they have any questions, feel free to message me. We don't bite. We love to talk about this sort of issues, and we'd love to help other people that don't really know how to start. So just message me, ask me questions. We'd love to help out.
Fantastic offer. Definitely something that people should be taking up. And also find out more about Neuro XR, because I think it'll blow your mind, quite literally. So that is the end of today's webcast. If you would like to join our community, or to be a guest on the show, you can go to www.distributedrepublic.xyz or follow us using the @distributed_rep. If you'd like to sponsor the webcast or show contribution or get your name on the ticker tape at the bottom there, go to www.stan.store/Jamie Bykov-Brett. And if your organization could benefit from more of this kind of information to get people starting to learn about the metaverse, the Web3, AI, do get in contact with us. We'd love to be able to deliver workshops. We can always partner with people within the industry as well to give you the best insights. But once again, thank you so much for your time, Elena, and I look forward to catching you all very soon.
Thank you.
See you soon.